Joining us right now, Rich Gray, and wow, Rich, it's been a while.
It has been a while. I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Well, Rich, one of the reasons why we're going to jump right into it, bring you on. We have Ed Smith over here, diehard Cleveland Indian, maybe, White Sox, a little disappointed in the Whites. But, Rich, I wanted to ask you right off the bat, with the Cubs playing so well, and I want Ed to chime in this, obviously playing. As a fan, do you worry about the media maybe bringing the guys, the pressure's going to catch up to the guys, or you think Joe Maddon's going to keep them in line? I know there's still a lot of baseball to go on, but boy, as they get closer and closer to the best record, do you think the media is just going to start weighing on the players, or do you think it's past them?
Well, it's interesting because they're hitting a little bit of a slump right now, at least the way that they've started off the season. Before last night, they had lost 4 straight. They're struggling with the Marlins today as we speak. But, the difference between, I think, this year and last year is they're dealing with more injuries. They're not serious injuries, but, Dexter Fowler's on the DL, Jorge Soler's on the DL, Ben Zobrist left the game last night. So they're relying on a lot more youth than they did last year. Last year's youth movement, guys like Addison Russell, Chris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, they came up and they overperformed and they were stellar and they propelled the Cubs to the playoffs. And this year, you have guys like Albert Almora Jr. who's been called up. You have Wilson Contreras who got called up. And they've kind of struggled a little bit but shown flashes of brilliance. But back to your point is, I think this struggle that they're going through right now will be beneficial in the long run because not only is it giving some of their younger guys success, but, it is giving this team a little bit of adversity. And, earlier this week they got swept at home by St. Louis. I think in the long run that was good for them because, say what you want about the Cardinals, they're a team that's always won the Central. They've been there at the top perennially. So, it was a way for the Cardinals to say, hey, we're not going anywhere. At the same time, after that sweep, the Cubs still had a 9.5-game lead in the division. So it is going to be interesting to see how the Cubs, the rest of the way, because they got off to such a hard start, how they play. But I do think Joe Maddon is the perfect manager to kind of keep this team in check.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just amazing what we've seen from the Cubs. Obviously, when start the year, they're rich. Now, kind of looking around the league, as you said, with some other teams there, especially in the Central, looking locally at the Diamondbacks, I had to bring it up there, but obviously the struggles to start the year, and when you were without A.J. Pollock, day before, opening day, basically right before that, but Greinke, Miller, some of their struggles going on, but obviously Greinke now has really turned the corner, and we're seeing the Greinke of old. Is this a team now that, obviously first thing first, you just want to get to 500 and go from there. But do you think there's enough with this team to make a comeback this year to get in a contention position? Or do you feel it was just such a slow start that even though they are playing much better, it might just be tough to kind of catch up with some of these other teams in the NL?
Well, I will say, at the beginning of the season, they looked to me as the third-place team in the NLS, despite everything they did. I just thought they didn't do enough offensively even before the Pollock injury. I was worried about some guys. Now, Jake Lammy's overperformed. Yasmani Tomas is kind of living up to expectations. That's been great. But, Goldie wasn't hitting for a while. I think they're now playing more to their capability. And I think what will help them in the long run and could keep them in a pennant chase is you have, a lot of teams in the National League right now that are underperforming. Yeah, the Giants, the Cubs, and the Nationals, they all have over 45 wins. But you look at the Mets, you look at the Cardinals, you look at the Pirates, you look at the Dodgers. They're not living up to the expectations, and they're keeping, some other teams like the Diamondbacks in that picture. Will they be able to get over that hump and stay into the pennant race into August and September? Probably not, but it is going to be interesting to see what happens next month as we get closer to the trading deadline, because I think there's going to be a lot of teams who are going to be in contention that didn't necessarily think they were going to be.
And that's a great point that you bring up, the fact that there are so many teams kind of log jammed in the middle of the field right now. You know, baseball is one of those sports. It's such a long haul. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. And,
right.
you know, I kind of find myself looking at the Diamondbacks, waiting for them to just give us a spurt to, you know, kind of shoot themselves up the rank. I think one good thing, though, one positive thing, I think the last time you and I were on, Greg, the Diamondbacks were in the cellar, and they find themselves at least a couple notches up right now. So, if anything, you know, you look at the bright side of things, I just think, you know, I think they do have to make a push into August, because once you get toward, you know, after the All-Star break, it's kind of one of those situations where, you know, you kind of start seeing the writing on the wall if you haven't made a push by then. So I think it's very important for them over the next few weeks to kind of, you know, take the momentum they have and kind of roll from there.
And speaking with that, Rich, because I know coming into the year, like you said, you thought third in the NL West, and yeah, I sort of did too, you know, because the Dodgers and Giants, you know, will find their ways, and they have. But do you feel that because of that, I mean, with all the young players the Diamondbacks have moved, now obviously their roster in general is still young, but in terms of the farm system, all the guys that have been traded, you know, and when you bring in a Zach Greinke, even though he's going to age well, the fact is once you get 3-4 years into the deal, you might see kind of a little downslope. Is this the type of situation where really it's a big disappointment in the sense of not making the playoffs and really big-time contending that first year, knowing maybe there's a small window, or do you think maybe there's a bigger window than at least I'm seeing?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with you that the window's kind of small. Really, it's to me, it's less to do with Greinke and Miller. I think the Diamondbacks made those moves because they realized they have Paul Goldschmidt in his prime on a very team-friendly contract. You know, he's probably the best value player as far as what they pay him and what they get out in Major League Baseball. I mean, you look at, you know, guys that are comparable to them, and they're making, you know, over $150 million or something close to it for the most part. So, you know, his contract's going to come up, you know, in a few years, and when that does, the Diamondbacks are going to have to overpay for him to keep him. So I think the big reason why they went out and got Zach Greinke, you know, made the trade to get Shelby Miller, is right now they have the money to put those resources in other areas to try to make the playoffs, to contend for a division, and, you know, who knows what might happen in October. So in that aspect, it is a little bit disappointing. But like I said, I'm not too surprised because I feel like they're still maybe a step or two away from being a playoff contender. You know, you look at the back end of their rotation, and still not that strong. You look at some of their pieces in offense, you know, even, you know, guys like their middle infield, like Owens and Ahmed, you know, they're great defenders, but, you know, you need their bats in the lineup to kind of, you know, perform better than what they have. So there are some areas where the D-backs need to improve, and that's something that's going to either have to happen here in the coming weeks before the deadline, or they're going to have to, you know, rely on their prospects, which, like you mentioned at the start of this question, that, you know, they trade a lot of them off that, you know, they were very high on. So it is a little bit of a disappointment that that's where they are right now.
Rich, speaking on that, what is the identity, or what are they building toward in, you know, with the Diamondbacks? I'm always curious when I watch a team in an organization, you know, are they a team of thumpers? Are they, you know, are they going to get out there and, you know, be aggressive, steal bases? Are they built on their pitching? What are they, you know, what is their design?
You know, that's a very good question, because they don't really have that outspoken leader. That they have a lot of guys who kind of lead by example, but you don't have, you know, like Paul Goldschmidt. He's obviously the best player on this team, but he's very reserved. You know, he goes about his business. He's not very flashy, and that's not a criticism. But you know, it's hard to develop an identity when your best player, you know, just comes to work every single day and, you know, and grinds it out, and, you know, he doesn't have a lot of flair to him. And again, like I said, you know, that's not a criticism at all. But you need someone on your team to kind of be the rally guy, to get the players going, to, you know, be loose, to have fun, and not take the game so seriously. You know, like you look at like the Cubs that we talked about at the beginning. I mean, there's so many guys on that roster that just play loose and have fun, and that's one of the keys to their success is they think they feel like they can win every game, and they also have fun doing it. And I think that's something that's kind of missing in baseball in some areas, because you have guys who take the game a little bit too seriously, which they're getting paid millions of dollars. You have to take the game seriously, but you also it's a fun sport to play. You got to have fun while you're out there as well.
Rich, we had mentioned, Paul Goldschmidt. Obviously, you got Zach Greinke as well. There are two guys they just don't like to talk to the media. They're the quiet guys in the locker room. I always felt like when they traded Aaron Hill, he was kind of the leader in the clubhouse. He was the one that was vocal. Maybe Wellington Castillo or David Peralta could, be the one to step up. But I'm kind of with you. I thought maybe we put too much emphasis on this team this year after they went out and got Greinke. And I mean, who knew that Miller was just going to lose his confidence? And so I guess we thought, well, looking at it overall and everything, maybe the team was not ready, but they have built up their farm system. They do have some pitchers down there. I mean, we can mention, Braden Shipley and everything. My biggest surprise with the Diamondbacks is they just cannot win at home. I mean, you win 50 games at home and then you split on the road at 4. There's your 90 wins. So maybe they can win 50 on the road and, split at home. But, you reverse that home record, or even I think they're 13-25. Even if you make them 500, they're in the contention. It's just amazing the last 2-3 years that this team cannot win at home.
Yeah, and I don't know. I can't really explain it. I don't know. Chase Field is obviously a hitter's ballpark. It's hitters friendly, and so maybe the way that they've built this team. You look at what they do offensively. That they're a very scrappy, kind of grinded out team. They don't hit for a lot of power, and they don't really play to the strength of the ballpark, which is not a bad thing, because you look, as you mentioned, at how well they play on the road, and you look at teams like Colorado who overperform at home, and then when they leave and they go on the road, their offensive numbers are not quite the same. And so finding that balance of not being too power friendly or power reliant, and not being just one of those teams that's going to kind of dink you to death. That's what the Diamondbacks kind of have to do in order to find that balance. But it is baffling, the fact that they're 13-25 at home. I mean, it's amazing that they can go onto the road. They could have a 4-game sweep at San Francisco earlier this year, and then they can come back and play absolutely terrible baseball. I can't figure out why it's like that.
But we're looking at 9-game homestand coming up, and you want to see this team's now at home. They got to start winning 7 games out of the 9. You have to start beating. You have I think you play the Dodgers 13 more times and the Giants like 10 or 11 more times. You got to start going 10-3, and if you really want to make contention, and the Diamondbacks have to decide, like you had mentioned earlier. You get into late July. Do you trade a Brad Ziegler where somebody is interested? I heard, you're going to hear all kinds of trade rumors, but, the
right.
Cubs would love to have him as an 8th inning guy where he can get the ground out pitches. And the Diamondbacks have to decide if they're going to be buyers or sellers or contenders or pretenders.
Yeah, and again, it's going to be tricky, too, going back to the point I made, is you have so many other teams in baseball right now that are in that log jam, as you guys mentioned. You got the Marlins, you got the Phillies, who are overperforming. You got, the Cardinals and the Pirates, and even the Brewers aren't playing that bad. So you got a lot of guys. You look at the wild card standings, and you have a lot of teams that are, only 6-7 games out. And right now, in June, being 6-7 back, that's not a bad thing. You have plenty of time to try to, make a run and turn your season around. And you get to that point where you have to make a decision. All right, are we going to go for it? Are we going to go for it this year and try to make that push and, give up some of our top players or some of our top prospects to get over that hump and make a playoff rush? Or are we going to kind of sit back and get pieces to try to build for next year? I think it would probably be more beneficial for the Diamondbacks to do the opposite, to maybe sell off, like you mentioned, a Brad Ziegler and see what you can get for him, or even like a Daniel Hudson, or there's a lot of talent on this team. They haven't been able to piece it together, and I think because of that, maybe you just reach a little bit. You don't need to completely rebuild, but maybe you move some pieces to try to improve yourself for next season.
One final thing on the Diamondbacks, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about the Pittsburgh Pirates. I've asked everybody that we've had on as guests. Everybody thinks that Chip Hale is on the hot seat. I'm not for changing managers, every couple of years. What do you think of Chip Hale?
I don't understand why that has come up. I really don't. And maybe it's just because, the Diamondbacks haven't been around in baseball that long, since only 1998. And you look at how many managers they've gone through already. Maybe just Diamondbacks fans expect to go through a manager every 2 or 3 seasons. But when you do that, it's hard to contend. It's hard to stay a consistent winner in baseball. And if you look at the structure of the Diamondbacks, if Chip Hale leaves, that's going to be because Tony La Russa and Dave Stewart got fired. They're not going to get rid of Chip Hale. He's their guy. And a lot of people want to criticize his lineups and stuff like that, but I think he's done a pretty good job with what he has. And he's gotten more. He last year, for sure, got more out of his team than anybody expected. And yes, they're underperforming this year, but that's no reason to make a change after a season and a half. I mean, you got to give the guy a chance to kind of build this organization going forward for that small window that they do have. And he needs some help from the front office. They didn't really do him any favors, I think, by, trading what they did to get Shelby Miller. So this whole Chip Hale being on a hot seat, to me, it's nonsense. He's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. All right, I want to get one more in before I'll let Ed and Greg finish up. I had the Pirates at the beginning of the year playing the Rangers in the World Series, and maybe, being a diehard Cub fan, maybe the Pirates were the team to wear. Is there anybody, maybe the Giants are the team that the Cubs worry about? I mean, I know, diehard Cub fan, are you saying right now the Cubs are going to the World Series, or are you kind of just holding back right now? So is there any team in the National League that they really need to watch out for?
No, you hit it right on the head. The Giants are the team because they've been there. I mean, and it's not, it's an even year. That really has nothing to do with it. You look at what they did in the offseason, and you could arguably say that they had a better offseason than the Cubs, maybe. And you look at their rotation, it's built for October. 1 through 4 is built for October. And I know Jake Peavy and Matt Cain have struggled, but you got Madison Bumgarner, you've got Jeff Samardzija, you've got Johnny Cueto. That's a solid 1 through 3. That's probably the best 1 through 3 in baseball right now. Then you add it to their already great bullpen that they have. They're going to be a tough out come October. Now, what could be their downfall is their offense. And if you've been watching them, they're 31-9 in their last 40 games, which is a ridiculous clip. But they play a lot of close games, and their offense doesn't really pick up their pitching as much as you would think, and you look at their run differential, it's not all that great. So I would expect the Giants to be looking to add a bat at the trade deadline, and if they can't do that, their offense could be a big reason why they get bounced in the playoffs, because when you get to October, you're going to be facing great pitching no matter who you see. And so I do worry about San Francisco. I would worry about them more, say, than the Nationals, because as much as great as Washington's been playing, Dusty Baker's their manager, and I love Dusty. He's great, but when it comes to the postseason, it hasn't worked for him for various different reasons. But a lot of them has been decisions that he's made. So right now, to me, sitting in June, if I were to predict an NLCS, it would be the Cubs and the Giants. That would be a fun series to watch, but yeah, they would be the team that if I were, being a Cubs fan, I'd be worried about the most.
Absolutely, and we're speaking with Rich Gray right here, NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. And Rich, before we let you go, and this something that Ed will probably like and appreciate, his Cleveland Indians doing very well. Winners of 7 straight right now, 42-30 on the year. Now, that division coming into the year at least seemed a lot of parity, and it is really, other than Minnesota. I mean, everyone is still in it. But Rich first, and then bring Ed and Jimmy in it real quick. Do you feel, still a lot of baseball to play, but Cleveland has enough to win the AL Central this year?
It's going to be, I don't think you can count out Kansas City just because what we've seen from the Royals the last 2 years, but it is going to be a dogfight in that division between them and the White Sox and the Royals and even the Tigers. And I know the White Sox have kind of tailed off recently, but all four of those teams have been kind of up and down in various times this season. The White Sox had a huge lead in the division earlier this season. The Royals ended up catching them and had a pretty big lead. And now the Indians caught both those teams, and they're in the lead of the division. So one thing I do like about the Indians, though, is their pitching. I think they probably have the best staff out of those three teams. And the key to that is Trevor Bauer, I think, might finally be realizing his potential after all these years in baseball. And, of course, the Diamondbacks being the team that gave up on him. But, if Bauer can keep pitching like this and keep living up to that high expectations when he was drafted in the top 10 a few years ago, that might be enough to push the Indians over. And who knows, maybe it's just the Cavs bump. Cleveland winning a championship is why the Indians are now suddenly playing great.
I couldn't agree with you more, Rich. I think this division of all of them is going to kind of bounce around all through the year. And I'm a big fan of Terry Francona. I spent a lot of time with him early in my career when I was with the White Sox. He was there, watched him come up through the minor leagues. And, I like his style. I was around him a little bit a few years ago when I was at Indians camp working out, doing a little coaching over there. And, he's one of those, you talk about Joe Madden is a good manager. Terry Francona is the same way in terms of how he treats his players. It's a lot of fun around the clubhouse. It's very light. The guys know when it's time to go to work, it's time to go to work. So, and the same thing goes over with the White Sox as well. I'm excited to watch this division probably more than any of them kind of work its way out throughout the year.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. The AL, I think, is going to be a lot more intense because, you look at the divisions in the National League, and the Nationals and the Cubs and the Giants are already running away with them. It's going to be a fun wild card race in the National League, but it's going to be chaotic in the AL because, I'm really outside of the Rangers. You've got, the four teams we mentioned, the Tigers, the Royals, the Indians, the White Sox. They're in the mix for not only the division but the wild card. And then in the AL East, you got, the Red Sox, Orioles, and Blue Jays. Those three teams are – so you got 7 teams that are essentially playing for 3-4 spots. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Absolutely, and some great stuff. Now, Rich, I lied. Actually, one more right before we let you go. Are the Detroit Red Wings going to sign Steven Stamkos?
All indications look like that. I was very surprised they were able to move the cap space, thanks to the Coyotes for helping out on that. And really, it was pretty even trade for both, I think. It was beneficial for the Coyotes because they got the draft pick, got the defenseman that they wanted to get, but later at 16 instead of at 8. And so now the Red Wings have all of this money to make a push to go get Stamkos, and they've really, surprisingly, they've been missing that type of player. As Datsuk and Zetterberg and all those guys have gotten older, they've missed that dynamic 30, 35, maybe 40 goals a year. They haven't had that, and that's a big reason why they've made the playoffs, but they've been an 8 seed, 7 seed. They've barely gotten in because they just haven't had that dynamic goal scorer on their team for several years. So that's a piece that's been missing in Detroit for sure for the past few years.
Well, it's going to be very exciting. And Rich Gray, thank you so much for joining us here. NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. And you could follow Rich on Twitter at Rich W. Gray. And Rich, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on the show, guys.
All right, and Dave King, Bright Side of the Sun, will join us after the break here, talk about the Suns draft and free agency. Breakthrough Sports on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060.